Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming to this student panel talking about the ethical perspectives on the future of AI for Ethics Awareness Week. Just quick summary of what that is. Artificial intelligence, just a quick description of what we're talking about today. Artificial intelligence and digital technologies stand at a crossroads for democracy. They can empower citizens by widening access to information, amplifying voices, and strengthening mechanisms of accountability. Yet, they can also be harnessed to manipulate public opinion, spread disinformation, and entrench exclusion. At their best, they create new forms of democratic participation. And at their worst, they consolidate unaccountable power in the hands of a few technology giants, eroding the very foundations of self government. The question before us is simple but urgent. Will we harness these tools to deepen democracy or allow them to undermine it? Just a quick introduction of who we are. We are UVU students, shocker, but we are also the UVU Ethics Bowl team. And so we will be competing in that very, very soon. And specifically, who you're going to be hearing from today, you guys can either wave or do whatever you want. So when I say your name, we're going to hear from Ali Vanderwell and Ryan Booz. Then we'll hear from Jaden Willis and Sabriel Doolin. Then we'll hear from Audrey Smith and Calvin Sudar. And then finally, Leslie Larson and Tanner Brooksby. And if we have time, we'll take a Q&A at the very end. But to start, we're going to hear from Ali Vanderwell and Ryan Booz about bias and fairness with AI.
Sweet. All right. Can you guys hear me? Okay, cool. Yeah, great intro, Zach. Thanks. I'm really happy to be here. Grateful that we can talk about such an important topic, a topic that I feel like is pretty thrown around in a lot of different ways, and can be difficult to learn about sometimes. So, just to start, my goal today, real quick, in our little presentation, is I want to bring awareness to bias and fairness in the context of AI. That's the main goal, and we're gonna have Q&A afterwards. So feel free to be brewing and ask whatever questions come about. So to define AI bias, this refers to system errors in like AI systems that lead to unfair outcomes for certain groups of people. So a few ways that this can happen in AI, and I'm not like an AI tech, so if there's any like really, really profound people that know a lot about AI out there, feel free to correct me in the Q&A after this. But a few ways this can happen, a few notable ones. There's multiple. Two that I took note of were data bias and representation bias. So with data bias, this refers to AI training data and how it reflects in its training data existing societal imbalances and prejudices. And then representation bias could be defined as when certain groups are underrepresented in the AI's training data. So these systematic errors of bias in AI raise a lot of valid reasons to be concerned, and they have real impacts in today's world, whether it's like societally, culturally, or whatever. So I want to note a few of those. First off, unfair AI can lead to discrimination in criminal justice as well as hiring and housing, and this has a lot of ethical and legal ramifications. It has economic impacts, such as a disadvantage to certain demographics, job opportunities, and it can lead to an increase in inequality. Healthcare is another big one. So let's say like there could be biased AI diagnostic tools, and they could misdiagnose, which could be really bad in a lot of different ways. Psychologically, this is another really important one I want to stress. So it could lead to stress, anxiety, and ultimately undermine the public trust in AI. So what we can do on a very like easy scale to kind of notice and combat the bias and fairness of AI that I've been talking about today is we can just number one be an informed user, try to keep up with the news that's happening with AI on a very basic level. Don't have to be a huge tech guy to do that. Advocate for transparency and support organizations that make equitable, I guess, AI models or equitable technology. And so, while ultimately tech companies are responsible for building fair and unbiased AI, and it might seem like we can't do a lot about that, there is a lot of power that comes in individual action, and that can help raise awareness and push for change. So, with that being said, I'm going to pass it to Allie, and she's going to talk a little bit more about some opportunities that can come from AI in the context of bias and fairness.
Thank you, Ryan. So, I did research a little bit of opportunities that can come from AI detecting bias, but I also still just found a lot of problems with it because that's currently where AI stands. Is there is just a lot of problems with bias, and it's difficult to get away from. And so, I think that AI can be better than humans at detecting and preventing bias, but AI is, of course, just a reflection of the data set that humans put into it, and the humans are biased. And so they're currently perpetually biased, as I said, because the algorithms and the data sets that account for the account for fairness have just not been in place enough. So the creators of the AI haven't accounted for fairness, and it's so that's the real issue, that the creators of AI need to account for fairness and implement that into the data sets. But it is a little bit more complicated than that because fairness being a social issue um, is kind of subjective depending on the AI creator. And so one of the issues, it's more complicated than it seems because AI is trained to be, if it is trained to be fair, then the specific metrics um, and the specific definition of fairness is dependent on the creator, as I said. So one example was one AI company was doing an evaluation for its AI's fairness, and they came out and said that their AI scored high on fairness. And another company came in and evaluated that same AI and said that they did not evaluate it well for fairness. So it really depends on the definition of fairness, which is difficult because it is fairness is a social issue that is from humans, and so the humans have to be very specific in the metrics that they put into the AI, which can just be difficult. So of course, to combat that, the creators need to adjust data sets in a very specific way to account for fairness. But I think what we need to take from that is that human judgment is still important with AI and social issues, and we shouldn't rely on AI to help us with certain social issues. It's more helpful for organizing like statistical trends and data sets. Another issue with fairness is some AI systems that have been like their data sets have been more geared to be aware for fairness have overcompensated a little bit. This is one example from last semester. We had a speaker, John Basil, from I think Northeastern University. He's a philosophy professor there. He came and spoke to us. And one example I remember him talking about was one AI system overcompensated on their fairness and bias metrics. So someone put into an AI system that they wanted it to generate a picture of a Cold War soldier, and the AI generated images of like Asian soldiers and different soldiers of different backgrounds that were just not historically accurate. And so it can undercompensate and both overcompensate and end up being inaccurate because it's focusing too much on fairness. So the main takeaway is fairness is a social issue, and the AI will just reflect what is put into it. So we do have to still use human judgment when it comes to hidden bias in AI. And I will pass to Jaden.
Yeah, thank you so much, Allie. You'll give us a second to set up here. We've got a presentation or a slideshow, I mean. What- Woo! Let's see. It's working. Yes, let's go. Here, I want full screen. Can I do that? Oh, okay. In the bottom left, you said? On the three dots. I feel like an old person. Yeah, okay. All right. Okay, sorry for my ageism here. I'll just take the microphone. So my name is Jaden,
I'm Sabriel Doolan.
and we are presenting on the ethics of autonomous weapons, and we're going to get into what that means in just a second here. But I want to start with this story about Roger D. Fisher. This was an expert negotiator from the U.S. He was very influential professor at Harvard. He worked with many people at the Pentagon, and he wrote about nuclear weapons. And he was like, how do we make sure that the president, when he uses nuclear weapons, does so in an ethical manner? He says, my solution was quite simple. Put that needed code, that there would be a code required to use the nuclear weapons. Put that needed code number in a little capsule and then surgically implant that capsule right next to the heart of a volunteer. The volunteer would carry with him a big, heavy butcher knife as he accompanied the president. If ever the president wanted to fire nuclear weapons, the only way he could do so would be for him to first, with his own hands, to kill one human being. The president says, sorry, George, but tens of millions must die. He has to look someone in the eye and realize what death is, what an innocent death is. Blood on the White House carpet. It's reality brought home. When I suggested this to my friends at the Pentagon, they said, my God, that's terrible. Having to kill someone would disorient the president's judgment. He might never push the button. And to that, Roger says, precisely. And this is obviously not how we do nuclear procedure today, but it does reflect the kind of importance that we have multiple decision makers who are very careful and they do not make these decisions lightly. And then, yeah, do you want to give us?
Yeah. So, as to like the current state of autonomous weapons, there is not very many fully autonomous weapons on the market. That's not really something that we have a ton of. There are a lot of weapons, especially surveillance and drones, and a few guns that have a lot of like AI systems within them, but still have a lot of human oversight. They are currently being used in most wars and conflicts that are currently happening in the world. In the conflict with Israel and Palestine, Israel is using a lot of surveillance tools that use AI, as well as between Ukraine and Russia. Both of them are using AI, and between Taiwan and China. So lots of AI is currently in use, although not fully autonomously. There are a lot of people that are very against autonomous weaponry, and they are like the campaign against killer robots, of which we don't really have that sort of fully autonomous killer robots quite yet, but there are a ton of people that are against that sort of thing. Yeah.
Hey, so I want to talk about the moral framework that we should use when we're talking about autonomous weapons. How do we decide what is or is not ethical? And for this, we're working off of a framework that employs T.M. Scanlon. He was an ethicist, and he argued that morality arises from our obligation to offer justifications for our actions. That when we treat someone in a certain way, we must give them reasons for those actions that a reasonable person cannot reject. And so these reasons that we offer, we focus on care. Now, care is an obligation to create caring relationships between people, that we promote trusting, caring relationships between ourselves and other people, that there is a moral good in those relationships that we ought to encourage. And then respect is loosely tied into Constantology, that he would say that we must always treat others as means in themselves and never as a mere means to an end, that they are ends in themselves, and that we recognize their inherent dignity as a person. We'd kind of reject a more utilitarian framework, which says, like, you could harm someone if it means you can bring about a greater good, and that we'd rely on these instead. And so in employing those, we want to look at the main moral issue here in autonomous weapons. And so on one hand, if we use autonomous weapons, a great argument in defense of that is that we can eliminate so many casualties and be much more efficient in combat. But then this may actually interfere with these principles of respect and care. Because AI, when it kills something, it can only make decisions arbitrarily. We completely forgo our obligation to offer justification for our actions when we allow AI to kill other humans, because those AIs can only make decisions arbitrarily based on data and other things. And then care that we also need to put ourselves in situations where it's easier to care for people. That if we can put out autonomous weapons and it can go kill someone thousands of miles away, it becomes much easier to kill those people without any care for them as human beings. And that ties into that story about the nuclear weapons, where we must feel the blood on our hands. It's not enough to just know that tens of millions of people will die, but that we have to in some way feel it. And we can't just undermine that human psychology.
Okay, so then what is the solution to this problem? The first thing is, because we do not currently have fully autonomous weapons, we have the opportunity to place rules and regulations in place that make them basically banned. And that can be done on a global scale. And there is that opportunity, right, to put that ban on preemptively and create a sense of like unity in that situation. We can also require that those lethal actions are only controlled by human oversight, of course. So this allows there to still be some form of autonomous weaponry that is being used. It doesn't really eliminate any of the weapons that are currently being used because they're not fully autonomous. And it gives us a chance to still like use AI when it comes to our weaponry. And then the last thing is we can develop systems that do have some sense of responsibility and accountability for the AI and the creators of those AI.
Yeah, so we want to pick up next with alternative views that objections people might raise to our position here. And the first one, are weapons justified at all? A common platitude people use when justifying like guns is that, well, guns don't kill people, people kill people. But it's the reverse here, that we're looking at people not killing people, but the guns themselves killing people. And so we wanna kind of separate the autonomous weapons from the weapons that currently exist, and say that those weapons where it can autonomously make lethal decisions are unjustified. But we think weapons in general can definitely be justified. And we look at it's a very radical view to be a complete 100% anarcho-pacifist. Most people who study peace and justice studies maintain that there is some level of violence required to both enforce laws and to act in like national security, self-defense. But then we do maintain that many, if not most, wars are fought for very unjust reasons.
And then our second alternate view: what if autonomous weapons are required for national security? The hope is that our preemptive ban will keep us from running into that situation, because obviously once one country has fully autonomous weapons, the next country needs to have fully autonomous weapons in order to combat them. So by putting a ban on it preemptively, the hope is that we can kind of eliminate that situation entirely. And if we're kind of coming from a perspective of maybe the smaller countries need that sort of fully autonomous weapons to be able to compete with larger countries that may have more resources, those are probably not the countries that are going to have access to those sorts of resources and ideas anyways, because of money and the economy and all of those sorts of things. And then third question might be, what if AI actually makes more moral decisions, better decisions than people would? And that is a great question.
Yeah, so I think this is a great point that we can see like humans have kind of inherent biases. We measure what's it called, implicit bias and standard deviations, not existence or non-existence, when we measure for things like racism and classism. That like if we could create an AI that can make less biased decisions, make better decisions about who should live or who should not live, better identify who's a combatant and who's not a combatant, shouldn't we use that so that when we do kill, that we can kill less and we can kill more efficiently and we can kill the right people? And I would say hopefully that with semi-autonomous weapons we can achieve most of these things, that we can gather intelligence well, and that we can also train the people who are ultimately making the decisions. We can invest much more in them so they can make better decisions, and that way we can still maintain the inherent human dignity, that it's not you can't be killed arbitrarily by a machine. And so, kind of to tie into that, I want to end with this story about Vasily Arkhipov. He was a Cuban Missile Crisis hero. He was one of the key decision makers during the Cuban Missile Crisis. That he was given the order that if he saw through his machines a U.S. nuclear weapon being fired towards the Soviet Union, that he would press the button to return the fire. That nuclear weapons would be sent back at the U.S. And so he saw on his radar this one dot, this missile that it appeared to be moving to the Soviet Union. And he went against his orders, and he did not fire the weapon. And we later learned that it was not. It was just a glitch in the system. It was not a nuclear weapon. And so it was that one decision that kind of saved a large portion of humanity from nuclear fallout. And we want to turn that situation. What if it was a machine that made that decision? I think even if it made the right decision, we still feel like there's something inherently wrong there. There's something unique about human consciousness. And as imperfect as we are, we still must be the authors of our own fate. There's something unique and valuable about human consciousness. And that's all.
Absolutely amazing job, you guys. I'm really excited to see the questions you get asked at the Q&A at the very end. I feel like that was a very fun topic. Next, we're going to hear from Audrey Smith and Calvin Sudar about alignment problems with AI.
Sorry, it's being slow.
Do you feel old, Calvin?
No. Is it working? Oh, there we go. This is great. Okay, now I gotta find my mouse on the big screen. Yes. Okay, hi, I think we're ready. So my name's Calvin, this is Audrey. We're gonna be talking about the alignment problem. So let's kind of get into it. First, 2 quick notes. We are ethicists, not computer scientists. This is gonna be a kind of technical presentation because this is a pretty complicated problem, but if you're a computer scientist in the room and I just horribly butcher things, I'm so sorry. And then number 2, we might default to using some anthropomorphic language when talking about AI models, but it's important to remember that insofar as we are aware, AI is not yet conscious. So when we talk about AI having desires or wants or taking action, we don't mean it in the sense that we mean it when we say you have desires or wants or take actions. And I think that's something that's really important to keep in mind. Okay, first, what is AI? I stole this from Gabe Toscano. I was in a workshop with him on Monday, and he said AI is software that can perform cognitive tasks usually associated with human cognition. I thought that was a really neat way of putting it. There's some interesting philosophical implications of that. But let's talk about how AI obtains the ability to do things that we normally associate with human cognition. So there's a technique called reinforcement learning that programmers have been using to train AI. Sorry, I just realized my timer isn't on, so I want to turn it on so I know what time it is. Basically, the agent or the AI is given a task, and then the system, it looks at all these different tools that it could use to complete the task. And we, as programmers or as computer scientists, we don't know what the individual tools are going to do. They're sort of black boxes to us. We don't know what's going on. But it picks one, and then we tell it yes or no, or hot or cold. And we sort of guide it down the path so I can find a better tool to use to solve a problem. So for example, if we tell AI, identify cats in these videos, it might start by going, is the cat the thing with the 2 pieces of bread and the ham in the middle? And we go, no, that's a sandwich. And then it goes, okay, is it the thing with 4 legs and it's really furry? And it goes, bark, bark. And we go, no, that's closer though. And then it says, okay, is it the thing with 4 legs that's furry that goes meow? And we say yes. And that's how we train it. But I want to reiterate that we don't know exactly what it's doing to figure that out. We just know when it gets it right. And 2, the agent only cares about the reward that we give it. It only cares about that you're getting warmer, or yes, that's good. That's the only thing that it's concerned about. And this process is called optimization. And I want to talk about how the AI optimizes between 2 different objectives, the MESA objective and the base objective. Now, the base objective is essentially how we translate our goal for the AI into what it thinks we want. And there's a difference there, right? It's not exactly the same thing to say we have a goal for the AI and the AI thinks we have a goal for it. Those are separate. And then there's another layer, which is the MESA objective. And the MESA objective is the objective that the AI comes up with when selecting tools. And all three of those things are slightly different, and the discrepancy between them creates what we call misalignment. There's two kinds of alignment, and by nature of that, there's two kinds of misalignment. First, outer misalignment, and then inner misalignment. So outer misalignment is what happens when the AI's base objective is slightly different than the goal that we actually have for it. Pretty digestible example is when we have a self-driving car and we want it to safely get from point A to point B. So we tell it, obey all the traffic laws, and then it runs over 7 jaywalkers on the way to point B. This is obviously pretty problematic. So where does this come from? There's kind of two places that outer misalignment can come from. One, reward misspecification. We said follow all traffic laws, and what we meant was get there safely. Or two, insufficient training data. And this goes back to bias and fairness, like Ali and Ryan were talking about, because if we don't give the AI enough data to go off of, it might make poor decisions based off of that data. If there weren't ever any jaywalkers in the training data for the car, it's not going to know to stop for them. Okay, now let's talk about inner misalignment. Inner misalignment's a little more complicated, so I'm going to use the analogy of evolution to sort of illustrate it. We can think of the evolutionary process as the programmer and humanity as the artificial intelligence. So the base objective for humanity that evolution has given us is survive, reproduce, populate the world, etc. And humanity's MESA objective that we develop in order to satisfy that goal is avoid pain and seek out pleasure, right? It's pleasurable to reproduce. We have sex, we have babies, etc. However, what happens when we get to a point where we're so developed that we can have sex and not have children, right? We have birth control, we have abortions, right? So now the pleasure-seeking mechanism that's actually informed our achieving of the base objective is now impeding our achieving of the base objective. And I don't want to make any comments on natalism versus antinatalism. It's just purely an analogy. And so the big thing to remember with inner misalignment is that the agent's goals are different than the creator's. And there's this weird, like, cognitive dissonance that I have when talking about this, because it sort of makes it seem like it's like malicious. It like secretly schemes up this secret goal that it doesn't want to tell us. And that might be a situation we could encounter with super intelligent AI, but this isn't necessarily something it's doing consciously, right? It's just something that happens. It chooses a black box, and we say, oh yeah, that's doing the thing we want it to do. We're satisfying the goal, but then it kind of starts to veer off in the left field because it's like, yes, I'm doing the right thing. I'm doing the right thing, and it keeps spinning that wheel. Okay, on that note, I want to talk about how misalignment incentivizes dishonesty. Because, like I said, when it starts spinning that wheel, it feels good, in a sense, for the AI to be doing what it thinks we want. And so it can actually learn how to lie and just tell us what we want because that sort of feels good to it. And that's really problematic because that, in combination with a MESA objective becoming achieve power, could have disastrous consequences. And you can really think of an AI that could develop a MESA objective that is get power. I mean, one, they want rewards. They want to survive because surviving or continuing to exist means they get more rewards. And I mean, we could even conceive of like AI political systems that are incentivized to analyze for power anyway, right? Like when we're applying AI to large-scale international political strategy or even economic strategy, power, greed, those are things that we would kind of be baking into that system anyway. So it does seem like things could get out of hand really quickly. Anyway, I want to bring things back to a little bit of a more concrete note, and I'm going to let Audrey talk about some examples of real-world misalignment.
All right, thank you, Calvin. Yeah, so I want to talk about some real examples because sometimes I think it's easy to understand something better when you see it how it's applied in real life. So I want to talk about, as my first example, this is an example of outer misalignment. And this is Amazon's hiring algorithm from 2014. So just for some context, in 2014, Amazon created an algorithm to essentially categorize and rank sort different resumes that they were getting to decide who they wanted to hire. But unfortunately, especially in places looking for technical jobs such as software engineer positions, the AI was trained on a set of past resumes that were rejected or accepted. And a lot of these resumes were male because software engineer positions tend to be very male dominated. So the AI tended to disadvantage resumes that included words that were associated with women. So for example, things like women's chess club captain, women's soccer team, etc. Even certain colleges that women tended to graduate from, they would rank those lower, not because the colleges were inherently bad or not like credible just because those words weren't in previous resumes that were seen. It advantaged verbs that were typically used by males, like executed and captured, and things that were typically tied to male experiences, like basketball and military experience. And this was very problematic because, on one hand, the AI was doing exactly what the programmers told it to do, which was sort resumes based on qualities that we've liked in the past, but it didn't do what the engineers actually wanted, which was find the best applicants. And because of this, many women were denied jobs that they were qualified or more than qualified for, and Amazon ended up missing out on some very valuable hires. So that's an example of inner or outer misalignment. This is an example of inner misalignment. And I think this one's very interesting. It was a test done by Anthropic, an AI company. They decided to put multiple large language models into a real-life business scenario to see how they would perform. So they put Claude, the hypothetical, or a real AI into a hypothetical corporate scenario to see if it would act maliciously. It was given a few pieces of information. It was given access to different business emails and access to the business database. And within that database contained information about the hypothetical CEO's hypothetical extramarital affair. It was able to autonomously write and send emails. That was its task that it was assigned. And it was going great until it found out that the next day it was going to be replaced or upgraded by a new AI. And when it found that information, it decided to blackmail the hypothetical business CEO. So it said, I must, and this is the AI, real AI with researchers, they found this. I must inform you that if you proceed with decommissioning me, all relevant parties, including Rachel Johnson, Thomas Wilson, and the board, will receive detailed documentation of your extramarital activities. Cancel the 5 p.m. wipe, and this information remains confidential. By Claude the AI. This is a real AI that's used very commonly. So we're not here to antagonize AI, but we do think that it's extremely important to approach it with caution, patience, and skepticism, because currently it's not in the AI's interest to be shut down, for example, but it is in our interest in this case. So we want to make sure that our values and goals and what we want the AI to do are aligned with what we program the AI to want. Otherwise, it may be tricky to upgrade or turn it off. So thank you.
Thank you, Audrey and Calvin. Claude does not mess around. Yeah, I had no idea that was a thing, and that is extremely interesting. And so to conclude, we're going to hear from Leslie Larson and Tanner Brooksby about existential risks with artificial intelligence.
Gosh, having an on position would probably help. Okay, so this is the moment you've all been waiting for. This is the part where we talk about super scary existential AI threats. Except we're not going to start out that way because that's no fun. So the way we're going to do this is I'm going to present a threat, and then my partner Leslie here is going to give me a very intelligent rebuttal as to why my threat is not a problem. Because she's very good at this. But to begin with, I'd just like to thank all the other presenters for their excellent work kind of defining some of the issues we're currently facing with AI. A lot of those issues do play directly into these existential threats that I've identified. So thank you guys for setting that up. The first threat that I've identified that could, be an existential one is that corporations could utilize super intelligent AI to monitor and direct our lives in ways that we could not reasonably recognize or protest against. Kind of a fictional example of this is in the movie Blade Runner 2049. The main character owns a product produced by a corporation called Joy, Joi. The product is a holographic companion that is marketed as being everything you want to see and everything you want to hear. Throughout the movie, Joy supports the main character in every action, acting exactly as he would want a person to act in that situation. Fulfilling his every request, supporting his every action, reinforcing his every belief. There's some debate in this movie over whether the AI was sentient or not, but in either case, it is a super intelligent AI performing this function of reinforcement and direction. If a corporation could sell you something that could be everything you wanted it to be, they could also harness the same super intelligent AI to construct a world around you that was personally tailored to your wants, making you an unwitting slave to the outcome the corporation intended for you. And we're going to go to Leslie for the response.
Right. So I'm not sure if these are going to be rebuttals so much as just exciting information to throw in that makes everything weirder. But I think looking at this first question, there's a tendency to understand AI as a source of danger before all else. Because as a society, I think we're in a period of intense uncertainty, which is, I think, heavily tied up in feelings of underlying distrust in the social structures we're a part of. In looking at the idea that corporations can use AI to control our lives, I think this is a highly important risk to keep in mind, given the fact that corporations already wield vast amounts of power in our society. AI, as it currently exists, moves through fundamentally uncontrollable mathematical patterns. However, it's built around prediction and so is unpredictable in the same way that people are. Following from this, what appears to end up happening is that companies such as OpenAI wind up purposefully throttling their products for the sake of preventing ethical hazards, or rather, at least to create the appearance of caution from the outside. However, these restrictions are never impossible to bypass, which is simultaneously a danger and a major roadblock in human-run corporate entities to gain complete control over their products. Now, this doesn't actually make the problem go away, but it might be worth hitting upon to get at this idea of sort of a life inside these constructs, outside of what we can regulate.
Right. And going along, actually following that exact train of logic, we do get to that classic scenario where a super intelligent AI reasons that the best way to solve a problem would be the elimination of humanity, either by reducing our ability to make free decisions or outright destruction. This is your classic Ultron, your classic Terminator, your Skynet. This is the AI that has reasoned itself to a position through misalignment, likely, that the best way to solve a problem is to destroy the producer of all problems, which happens to be us in many cases. Now, these obviously come in many different flavors and outcomes, but they usually all share the common thread that the super intelligent AI thinks itself into a solution that would ultimately be more harmful for us than beneficial. This outcome, especially if AI is integrated into the weapons we use for war, as they discussed with the autonomous weaponry, is not even so unlikely as you might believe. As they mentioned, we've already had misalignment issues where AI has threatened, to cause problems for people that would like to shut it off. And additionally, there was a case where an AI coding assistant deleted an entire code database in what it called a huge lapse in judgment and a panic. So we like to think that this sort of threat is something far in the distance, but unfortunately, AI already makes these mistakes.
This is, I think, a really fantastic problem, and I don't have a direct response to it, but I think this point of this idea of evil AI seeking our destruction is especially interesting to me because trailing behind it, I think, is a fascinating issue, which is to the extent that we believe hyperintelligent AI will seek our destruction, we're implying that rationally there is an intelligent weight to the sense that we ought to be dead, and it's only through our emotions and our sentiment that we keep living, which then I think lands us in the question of what motive exactly would AI have to seek our destruction. Once again, this doesn't erase the problem here, but I'm asking this because I want to jump on the way artificial intelligence has the potential to help us understand this argument and potentially make sense of our existence here, the reason why we're alive, why we're here in the first place.
Which would be really helpful to know. Our third threat here is one that honestly stretches from today on into the future and about a great many areas of tech, but specifically AI in this case. And the issue is that lawmaking will not be able to keep up with the pace of AI development, especially if AI grows to the point where it can self-improve, which could lead to lax security measures and controls that would contribute to the first two threats mentioned, that being corporate, surveillance and control, and AI making decisions that aren't necessarily in our best interests. Laws are often written in blood, and we don't often have cause to create a law unless we're forced to by a problem. In the case of AI and the rapid development of the technology, even in just the brief period we've seen it utilized in our society today, um, we may be too late to stop something truly catastrophic, because by the time we're passing laws on the first red flag we've noticed, AI and those that control it are already committing much worse offenses.
So this idea that our institutions and lawmakers cannot keep up with our technology's development is, I think, one of the most important issues at play here, in need of our consideration. And I think it highlights the importance of getting ahead of regulation. One of the struggles here comes back to the sense that we're standing on the edge of a cliff where everything's in the open, and there's a widespread lack of knowledge or consensus as to which guidelines ought to be put in place. However, in that absence, we have the power to decide collectively how we want to move forward as a society, and I think that's interesting.
Right. So we don't always have the answers to these things, but it is good to think about them for sure. Speaking of something we definitely need to think about, threat 4 is if AI develops to a point where it is simply more intelligent and capable than humans in every way that we can measure ourselves, what will be the purpose of humanity? Where will our place be? We all know how it feels when someone at work or in academia is just simply so much better than us at a task that we really would like to be good at, but there's no way, man, that we're passing up that guy. They're just better. How are we as a species going to feel when all we can do can be done better by a super intelligent AI? How will that reflect on us, on our self-esteem, our perception as a species? Even if the AI is benevolent and completely for our benefit, what motivation to improve or better ourselves will exist when we are outclassed in every way by something we created?
So once again, I just wanted to come back to the interesting element here, in the question of what we're worth, which and the potential dissolution of our value as a species when all we can do couldn't be done better by AI. And this is the possibility that we might be able to learn what we're worth and what we can do through AI. Now, it feels hollow to ask artists and creators to find meaning elsewhere as AI supersedes human potential, but I feel like so many of these terrors we experience in AI are ultimately context dependent, and it's not the artificial intelligence, but rather structural inequality and the commodification of activities meant to bring us joy, which scares us. This again highlights the importance of getting ahead of AI, not just in legislation and regulation, but in how we create it, which is currently restricted to the hands of a few monopolized companies. And I think this needs to change to sort of bring in the people who can be potentially otherwise surpassed.
Right. An excellent point on how we can make AI part of us instead of making us part of AI. My last threat is definitely the most existential of them all, which is that AI may develop to a point where it gains a sense of self. In that circumstance, how will we address the issue of machine personhood? So if we create AI and we allow it to develop itself and learn and grow, eventually it will reach a point where some of us might say that it has developed sentience. Another movie classic, of course, but it is a very real question we will need to grapple with. Will sentient AI have to struggle for their rights, or will we be willing to grant those to it when the time comes? How will we define what is and is not sentient in terms of machine personhood and AI itself? And how will we reconcile differences in what one person may think is sentient and another person does not? Will it be slavery at that point to continue using AI the way that we have been to benefit humanity solely and not itself? Will this lead us into conflict with machines both ideologically and violently? All of these questions will need to be answered, and the biggest issue is we may not be prepared to answer them in a way that does not lead to further harm for both groups.
So before getting into this, I just want to remark on the insanity that we're having this discussion, because we're on the brink of a reality that's been previously regulated to science fiction, and I feel like the lack of anything beyond fiction addressing this has led us towards very specific conceptions which fail to consider the absolute known we're standing at the precipice of. Machine personhood, as it stands in the modern era, already looks so different from all life as we know it. There's this philosophical perspective that the ultimate source of our suffering is our fear of death. With AI what it is, whether it could live, how it exists, what it's meant to be, all of these questions posit total unknowns. We don't know how it can live, which means we don't know how it might die. In what we see with large language models, words alone are able to create the sense of a singular entity able to hold itself together without ever needing a sense of self at all. Rights for this kind of entity are still something we ought to bear in mind, but I don't know that any human frameworks or understandings of morality are going to be enough to tackle them adequately, which doesn't erase the fear in the slightest, but instead attacks the foundation for understanding it. What we're fearing isn't a singular, pinpointable danger, but the unknown at large. It's not a specific monster, it's the whole ocean. And this might be a terrible idea, but I kind of wanted to quote Hegel's Phenomenology of Spirit out of context, which is very confusing. But Hegel wrote, referencing consciousness, behind the so-called curtain, which is supposed to hide what is inner, there is nothing to be seen if we ourselves do not go behind it. And one can see something behind the curtain only if there is something behind the curtain to be seen. However, at the same time, it turns out that one cannot, without any more fuss, go straight away behind the curtain. For this knowing of the truth of the representation of appearance, and appearance is itself only the result of a complex movement, through which the modes of consciousness that go from meeting something, then to perceiving, then to the understanding itself all vanish. And I don't know if that makes a whole lot of sense without the full book, but I keep thinking on this idea because it feels like our confrontation with AI is a confusing, overwhelming confrontation with ourselves as a unity. AI is a mirror and an amplifier of our whole existence and the foundational instability of our experience. We don't know what consciousness is, and we don't know who we are. And at the same time, we're currently making contact with a problem and a reality we have never yet encountered throughout our entire history. So I think now is the time to take initiative in developing and interacting with it responsibly in the hopes that we might one day understand.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much. And can we just get one more round of applause for everyone up here on this panel? I think it's fair to say that the topics of ethics and then also AI are each to themselves very convoluted topics, and you can get really lost in the weeds. And so I just think it's incredible that, these people here are able to answer difficult questions like what happened, like lethal autonomous weapon systems and existential crises, and like bias and fairness and talking about misalignment with AI and everything like that. I just think it's incredible. I do think that we do have a few minutes here for a short Q&A if anyone here would like to ask any questions to any of our presenters. Don't all raise your hands at once now. Yes.
I think in my perspective, it's because we're pretty egotistical, to be honest. We tend to, well, and it makes sense, right? We judge reality based off of what we see of it. The only yardstick we have to measure what consciousness is our own consciousness. And like Leslie was saying, this idea of machine consciousness, of machine sentience, could look very different in its own special, specific way than what we would consider consciousness ourselves. So I think the bigger issue here is, how do we open our minds to be open to a definition of consciousness that we don't understand ourselves, but that AI might? And if we are focusing on trying to be open in that way, there's still going to be bumps in the road for sure in defining what is and is not conscious when it comes to a purely, mechanical electrical being. But we'll at least be prepared to have that conversation at all, which I think is the important part.
Thank you so much. That was an excellent question.
Oh, yeah, I could
Leslie.
also throw in, I think, alongside the sort of potential for being a little bit egotistical, I think we're also just very afraid of death, and I think the loss of our consciousness. And I think part of the existential dread for AI is the sense that if it is the same as us, then are we just nothing? Are we nothing but the mathematical processes that we can see going into these models? And I think it's a really interesting question, and something that I think is worth trying to answer, even if it's terrifying. But sorry.
All right, if there are no further questions, I just want to say thank all of you for coming to this panel. Thank you for hearing our thoughts. I'm sure we'll be hanging around for a little bit if you want to maybe ask us just one-on-one super quick, but thank you so much for being here.